So, and I don't know if this was be Veronica or Vianica, but there we go, is asking what was a structural relationship in Exodus 25 to 31?
So I love this question because it's all about the sanctuary. And I love anything related to the sanctuary. And I really think the answer that is really found in the book of Exodus, chapter 25, verses 8 to 9, because that is the structure of what's kind of going on. So basically, Exodus chapters 28 through 31 are talking about um, the building of the sanctuary, what God's people were to do in the process of making a sanctuary. And so when you look at Exodus chapter 25 and verses 8 and 9, I think that really makes it pretty clear as to what, the structural relationship is. And so in verse 8, God says, and let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. So that's the point. Like that's the static truth of this. The purpose of these chapters is that God is requiring his people to make a sanctuary so that he can dwell among them. That's the purpose. And to make it more clear, he says in verse 9, according to all that I show you after the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all that its furnishings, just so you shall make it. You need to make it just like this. And so the rest of these chapters, for the most part, Exodus 25 through 31, go into the details of these things. And the structure is basically the main focus is, God says build a sanctuary. I think I made a little chart. I know it's kind of simple, nothing that complicated. I don't know if we could get it on the screen or not, but it's basically, the main focus is God, is calling his people to provide the means to build the sanctuary. That's the focus. And then what goes out is, they were to give things like in, these chapters, like you see, that they needed to give gold, they needed to give brass, they needed to give, certain types of fabrics. And so like the gold was to build, the candlestick from just one lump of gold. And it was supposed to overlay certain articles of furniture. The bronze was to build the brazen laver as well as overlay other furniture. The fabric was to build the curtains as well as to, create garments for the priests, depending on what kind of fabric it was. So that's kind of that's the structural pattern that you see in these chapters. And what's interesting is the focus is kind of laid out as to, kind of like why, what was the end goal. And you see that in Exodus 31, verses 12 through 17, which basically God's saying, after you make the sanctuary is so that I can dwell among you. What I want you to do now is keep the Sabbath. And that's what he says in Exodus 31, verses 12 through 17, is he's like, so remember the Sabbath, keep the Sabbath. This is the point. This is, that's a focus point as far as you entering into a worship with me, that I can dwell among you, that we spend time together. And then in verse 18, God then gives Moses the 2 tables of stone, which contain the 10 commandments written by God's finger. And so, and in that, basically, that's how we can maintain that right relationship with God, is through keeping his commandments. Just as Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. And we know one of those commandments, the 4th commandment, is the keeping of the Sabbath day. So I hope that kind of makes a kind of a clear point as far as, the structural relationship that we see here, is that God wanted to be with his people, and he tells them to make this sanctuary, to understand spiritual truths, and, as an act of obedience. And then, the fulfillment of that is in their appropriate keeping of the Sabbath, as well as keeping of his 10 commandments. So I hope that answers your question. And if not, be sure to submit another one and we'll be happy to answer that.